So, hello, Kate Flora. First of all,
Hello, Sarah Smith.
you're up in Maine now.
I,
So, would you give us the panorama
oh,
of the view out your window?
absolutely. All right, here we go. I don't know how bright this will be, but there is the ocean. And if we turn the other way, there is the birch tree and the cove. And if we turn this way, there's my next door neighbor's house. And that's about it. It's a brand new third floor office that room table every time we wanted to eat, with one of us working at one end and one at the other.
I'm going to close a couple of windows because I'm having trouble with you guys. There. And so you have come with something to read.
I have come with something to read, Sarah. And
Is it from a new book?
Well, actually, I looked at the new books. I looked at the work in progress. I looked at the book that my agent can't sell right now because it has a white male cop protagonist. I looked at all these different books and I decided that just for fun, first I looked at this, which is The Faking of the President, which is the new anthology I have a story in. But I decided that it wasn't a great Huey Long day. So I'm not reading Long Live Long. This is a very, what do you call it, long-winded wind-up. So I decided I would read a story from a new collection called Heartbreaks and Half-Truths. Because I'm sitting in Maine and because this is a story about Maine lobstermen, sort of. So shall I just dive in?
How appropriate.
Yes, I thought so. So are you ready for me to do this thing?
We are ready.
All right. Okay. So the story is called Afterlife. Since Hal died, Ida has had too much time on her hands. While he was with her, she never noticed how much of her day was spent taking care of his needs. Now she never cooked breakfast or lunch and was content with a bowl of soup or a quick sandwich for dinner, instead of the meat, starch, and vegetables she'd cooked daily for 50 years. She needed far fewer groceries and wasn't always going to the store to pick up donuts or chocolate milk or some fancy juice drink. Ida was happy with water, coffee, or tea. Her kitchen counters weren't cluttered with returnable cans and bottles. She wore clothes that didn't need to be ironed. She slept until 8 because there was not that she didn't miss it. The bed was too cold. She hated taking care of the car herself. There was no one to talk to. She even missed his pleasure when he sat down to a hot meal. But Hal had gone to the afterlife and Ida was trying to make the best of it. One bright spot of being allowed to be lazy, what another person might have called relaxing, was sitting at their big picture window and watching the world go by. Now that she was an old lady, and at 84 she was an old lady, she could watch the world with impunity, ignoring her mother's ingrained admonition to mind her own business. Her life was dull. She liked minding other people's business. Her favorite kind of business was watching the lobstermen coming in with their catches on the lobster dock across the road. When Ida was young, men were generally covered up. Sure, on an occasional hot summer day, a working man would take his shirt off, but it was not common. Of course, there were shirtless men at the beach. Maybe men were different back then, but she couldn't recall seeing a single man without a shirt who was really worth looking at. Her Hal might have been the exception, but these young lobstermen, striding unselfconsciously around with no shirts and their pants slung low on their hips, they were a sight for aging eyes. She supposed there were people who would accuse her of being a dirty old lady, but Ida thought, like paintings in a museum, they were made to be admired, and she was a dedicated admirer. The season for shirtless lobstermen in Maine was short, so Ida put in all the time she could sitting at the window watching the display of male culture. She had two she especially liked to watch, taking pleasure in what she called her silent movie. She called them the red and the black, which she was pretty sure was the title of something she'd read in French class 1,000 years ago. Red wasn't really red. His hair was a rich red-brown that got lighter with almost blonde streaks in the summer sun. He was made just like a man should be made, a big man, strong shoulders and chest with visible muscles and the narrow, almost sinuous hips of a swimmer. His chest and arms were furred with lighter red, enough that, had he not been so lovely, he would have been simian. When the sun lit him up and his red hair glowed, Ida imagined a Scotsman on some long ago battlefield, hips wrapped in a kilt and girded with a sword. From her window, Ida couldn't tell what color his eyes were. They might have been green, but she imagined them the deep blue of a summer sea. He seemed to have some kind of authority over the others. When he spoke, the rest of them nodded and deferred, maybe because everyone's catch. She thought that was the case. Ida liked to watch him, but only as a voyeur, as an object, not someone to be cared about. Even without hearing him speak a word, she knew she didn't like him. Ida believed that how you treated people showed who you really were, and he didn't treat people well. He threw his authority and his strength around. Hal used to say that a true leader led by example, led quietly, led with respect. He'd been that kind of man. The man she called Red wasn't. He bullied the smaller men and was disrespectful to the older ones, men who'd been doing this job since Red was in diapers. The one she called Black was quietly and certainly his own man. He was a smaller man, compact, lithe and wiry, with a way of moving that suggested at any moment he might spring into violent action. He carried a kind of suppressed anger that never left him. He didn't try to interfere with Red's treatment of others, but he never nodded or deferred to Red, something that clearly made Red fume. Ida admired his independence, even as it concerned her. Ida favored him for two reasons. First, his hair. All her life, Ida had been a sucker for men's hair. Their eyes, of course, but more so their hair. Black had black hair, truly black hair, the kind that was almost blue. He must have been vain about it because he kept it long, ridiculously long, tied back with an elastic, the springy curls bouncing down his back. Any woman would have been jealous of that hair. Many women must long to run their fingers through it. The second reason she favored him was that he was kind. When they were sitting here together talking, after Ida confessed her fondness for watching them, her friend Mabel wanted to know how on earth, from way over here, Ida could possibly know that a man was kind. The truth was, she just knew. The evidence was the many times she'd seen him take a moment to help someone who needed a hand, lifting the other end of something heavy, or laying a comforting hand on the shoulder of someone Red had just chewed out. She'd seen him give his sweatshirt to the kid who was just starting out, maybe 16 or 17, not filled out yet, on a day when it had suddenly turned cold. She'd seen him give money to someone who'd had a bad week. I should ask you, Sarah, how long you want me to read. I'm having such a good time.
Oh, just go to the end, I should think.
Okay, we'll see. Ida had spent over 50 years with a kind man. Hal had been like Black. He had seen when people needed help and offered it without being asked, known who was down on their luck and might need a hand. He dropped off wood for people's stoves and vegetables when the garden was in season. Never asked for thanks. He just believed that's how people ought to be. So even though physically Black was nothing like Hal, who'd been a big man, hefty, with big hands and a big voice, Black reminded her of Hal. Even though folks would likely Ida found watching made her feel closer to Hal. Sometimes she indulged in the lonely old woman's habit of talking to herself, or at least setting out a second plate and cup for her now departed Hal, and then talking as though he was still sitting there. There's something going on between Red and Black, Hal, something that isn't good. Hal would have watched for a while and then said, I see what you mean. All those years together, it didn't take much talk for there to be communication. I'm worried about him, about Black. The way Red is looking when Black's back is turned makes me uneasy. Hal would have leaned back in his chair. She could almost see him do it. He'd hook his thumbs behind the bib of his faded denim overalls. He'd watch. He'd rock a bit. Then he'd tell her what he was thinking. Now that he was gone, she had to supply both sides of the conversation. But she knew how he thought, how he saw the world. so she could speak for him. What he'd say was, "That lad, Black, had better watch himself. Something is brewing over there with Red. And that Red isn't a man to restrain himself if someone comes between him and anything he wants. I haven't heard any rumors, but my guess is there's a girl involved." There was a girl involved. One as lovely in her way as Red and Black were in theirs. She was a smallish girl with long honey brown hair. Ida especially liked her because she wore dresses. The day Ida first saw her, it was a flowery delphinium blue dress that looked like something a girl in a French movie would wear. On the girl, it was sweet. It swayed in the wind and was so graceful and feminine. These days, most girls didn't seem to care about being feminine. Sexy, yes, but not graceful and demure and womanly. Hal had thought that she, Ida, was demure and graceful. He said that was why he first asked her to dance, because she wasn't just pretty, she had something. He hadn't quite been able to describe it, but he used the words demure and feminine. Hal would have liked this girl. The girl stopped her little silver car right in front of Ida's house and walked down to the dock, looking like she was there to pick someone up. She had dainty little black shoes with straps across them, the ones Ida had always called Mary Jane's. Ida looked over at Hal's chair and said, "I wonder who she's come for." Hal would have said, whoever it was, he was a lucky guy. Because she favored him, Ida hoped the girl had come for Black. They would have been lovely together, both with their long flowing hair, like the cover on those fantasy books her granddaughter read. As the girl started down the driveway to the dock, the wind off the sea caught her dress, and she had to grab the skirt to keep it down. Ida remembered her skirt doing that. Hal had teased her about copying Marilyn Monroe. Before the girl got to the bottom of the drive, and Ida
Oh dear.
Oops.
and honked her here to drive Ida to the library for their afternoon working on puzzles. Ida had to go into the hall to get her sweater and her tote bag. By the time she got out on the steps, the girl had disappeared into the building. The girl was back again the next day. This time, Ida had no reason to leave her window. She sat in her rocker watching. Today, the girl's dress was a pretty coral, and the shoes were matching espadrilles tied with ribbons around her ankles. Those bright little feet tripped down the driveway, slowing at the bottom and looking into the room where the men weighed and sorted their catch. A moment later, Black appeared, and the girl hurried toward him. She linked her arm through his, and they started back up the driveway to her car, utterly lost in each other, as young lovers were. Behind them, Ida saw Red appear in the doorway, watching them. He didn't speak, but she didn't need words to know what was going on. It was in his look, in the set of his body. Red wanted the girl and was vowing to do some harm to his rival to make that happen. Ida disliked conflict. It made her uneasy and raised her blood pressure. She could have saved herself some grief if she'd simply closed the curtain or gone out on the back porch where she could look out over the garden. She had just a small garden this year. Her daughter had helped her put it in. She didn't need much because she didn't eat much, but the thought of going through a whole summer without lettuce and broccoli and beans and zucchini and carrots and especially fresh tomatoes was unbearable. She could have gone to the farmer's market. They were pleasant, but she'd had too many decades of nipping out the back door and picking what they needed. She wasn't ready to give that up. Fruit, fresh vegetables, and watching beautiful young men. That was Ida's summer this first year without Hal. On Wednesday, she'd seen Red gathering some of the other men around him. Their heads had come together like parties to a conspiracy, and then they'd broken apart and gone back to work. Black hadn't been around just then. He was down on the lower dock, helping another lobsterman unload his catch. At the end of the day, the girl had come as usual, wearing the blue dress again. Once again, Ida saw them walk up the drive arm in arm and drive away in the little silver car. Once again, she saw Red in the doorway. This time there were other men with him, and they were gesturing toward the silver car and then toward one of the boats, and Red's gestures looked angry. That night, Ida set the table for two. She needed to talk to Hal about what she'd seen. Hal was always so sensible. He would counsel caution. He would agree that it looked suspicious, but that Ida shouldn't jump to conclusions. He would urge her to be patient. Most people were good at heart. She really didn't know Red or whether he was capable of wrongdoing. Ida always listened to his counsel. He was wise. She admired that about her Hal. Other people used to come to him for advice, both because Ida tended to be more emotional. Hal said that was okay. It was feminine. Besides, he said, feminine intuition also had a place in decision-making. She wished he were here now. She had convinced herself that something terrible was going to happen. She was so agitated, she couldn't, couldn't watch her favorite TV shows. Around 9, she figured the next best thing to consulting Hal was to call his younger brother, Reggie. Reggie was 12 years younger, practically a spring chicken at 71. Reggie was also a retired lawman. Ida explained that she needed his advice and didn't want to wait for the morning. Reggie lived only a couple miles away. He said he'd be right over. Like Hal, Reggie loved to eat. So Ida pulled an apple pie from the freezer and put it in the oven. Apple pie and ice cream were the least she could do for interrupting his evening, even though, like her, he had lost his spouse and probably spent his evenings watching television. Reggie arrived in an agitated state, perhaps because he felt responsible for taking care of his brother's widow. She got him seated in the living room, promised that there would be pie in 15 minutes, and sat across from him to describe her dilemma. He listened with a cop's attention, asking her questions to clarify things, and never once made her feel nosy or ridiculous. Like Hal, Reggie was a kind man. Believe it or not, Ida, many times alert and attentive people like you were essential in helping us solve crimes. Regardless of what our mothers may have told us about minding our business, being curious can be a good thing. Ida imagined Reggie had been very good at calming distressed crime victims. Over warm pie and ice cream, she asked, Reggie, tell me honestly, am I overreacting, making a mountain out of a molehill? I'll be straight with you, Ida. When you started to tell me about this, I was skeptical. What I said about alert and attentive people, I meant that. But we'd get plenty of calls that were making a lot out of nothing. Reggie ducked his head, clearly embarrassed at saying this to his older brother's wife. Like most people, Reggie had looked up to Hal, and that respect also attached to Ida. Ida waited. Maybe he was telling her something. Telling her it was all her imagination, but there seemed to be something Reggie wanted to say. I'm recording this. But here's the thing. I'm pretty sure the men you describe are Red Schofield and Garrett Stetson. So I believe you're reading the situation right. Schofield is a bully, has been pretty much since he could walk, and his daddy believes he can do no wrong. Stetson is a good man, but he and Schofield rub each other the wrong way. No one owns Stetson, and Schofield is used to being defeated. As Reverend Porter's daughter, Rebecca. There's not a sweeter girl to be found around here. I hear Schofield has been after her for the better part of a year, and she's just not interested. Where she's very interested in Garrett Stetson, and he's head over heels for her. Schofield's mad as hell, and there's no telling what he might do. Reggie patted Ida's hand. Don't look so upset, Ida. The right people know what's going on. Nothing bad is going to happen. He looked longingly toward the kitchen. I don't suppose there's more pie. She fed him another slice and sent the rest of the pie home with him. She could always make another, and she kind of missed feeding a hungry man. Hoping Reggie was right and that there was really nothing to worry about, she washed their few dishes and went up to bed. It was the next day. She was sure it was Thursday because that was the day she went to the library to work on jigsaw puzzles with her friend Mabel, that Black, or rather Garrett Stetson, disappeared. She'd seen him around in the morning, heading down to his boat, watched his boat go out and Red's boat go out a little later at a time when Red didn't usually go out. He'd send a crew with his boat and stay behind. She'd gotten wrapped up in gardening, and then she'd seen Red's boat come back, the other boats come in, and all the other guys milling about doing whatever it was they did with lobsters. But Black didn't come. She was so worried that she didn't want to go with Mabel, but it was a regular thing they did. Mabel was a lonely widow too, and she had no good reason to cancel. She was a wreck the whole time they were at the library, so inattentive that Mabel asked if she was okay. She said the thing everyone always said, that she hadn't slept well. It was true too. Eating pie so late in the evening meant the sugar always kept her up, but she hadn't wanted Reggie to feel uncomfortable about eating pie alone, so she'd sacrificed her sleep. She couldn't tell Mabel about Red and Black and the lovely girl. Mabel already thought she was too caught up in watching half-naked young men and weaving her fantasies about them. When Mabel dropped her off, she went straight to her window to watch. It was getting late. Maybe the girl had come and Ida had missed her. Still, she watched, worried about what was happening. All the other boats were back except Garrett's. Then she saw the little silver car stopping out front. Today, the girl, Ida knew her name now, Rebecca Porter, was wearing a pink dress, a pretty pink dress to please the man who wasn't there. Hands knotted in distress, Ida watched those happy little feet trip down the driveway, watched Red Schofield step out and speak to her, watched the girl's anxious questioning, saw Schofield shake his head, point to where Garrett's boat was usually moored, then shrug, then say something and laugh. The girl didn't laugh with him. Ida the drive. She stood a while beside the car, staring out to sea as though her love could call Garrett Stetson back. Out in the cove, a marine patrol boat was towing in Garrett's boat. They left it at Garrett Stetson's mooring, but there was no sign of Garrett, though the girl stood watching, her body rigid. As the day grew cold and the sunlight began to fade into dusk, the girl finally gave up and got in her car. She was backing into Ida's driveway to turn around when two sheriff's patrol cars came around the bend and pulled into the Lobster Wharf's driveway. The passenger door was the first one opened, and Garrett Stetson sprang out. His clothes clung to his body as if he'd just been fished out of the sea. Neither wet nor cold held him back as he sprinted toward the little silver car. Just like in a romance movie, the girl leapt out and raced toward him, wrapping her arms around him, heedless of her pretty pink dress. They kissed like they were the first people in the world to discover kissing. Ida liked that expression. Hal had taught it to her. Officers from both cars continued down the driveway and disappeared inside. Moments later, they reappeared, a handcuffed Red Schofield between them. They placed him in the back seat of one of the cars, then both cars reversed and went back the way they came. Reggie said that the right people knew what was going on. That was likely true. Still, she felt like she'd had a part in it, maybe made them more vigilant. It was a big ocean, and too easily bad things could be made to look like accidents. Before she fell asleep, she turned to Hal's side of the bed. Thanks for teaching me what a good person does, Hal. So that's about as close to romance as I got, but
That was good.
That was fun. That was good.
isn't it fun?
Really good.
It's, I mean, you know, one day here on the island, I needed to get some lobsters, and I am an old lady, and I walked into the lobster pound, and I almost lost my breath. All these guys in the, you know, with their rubber overalls down around their waists and no shirts and just strutting around, and it was beautiful.
Mm.
So that's what I gave to Ida last summer. And I was looking around to see if I had a copy of it here. Last summer, my project was to take the book called The Corpse in the Compost, which was my mother's mystery that she was working on when she died. She had published The Maine Mulch Murder in her 80s, writing the sequel when she died. And so I had this manuscript, and I thought, wouldn't it be a nice gesture, you know, in Mom's memory to publish her book? So I finished it and edited it and published it last summer. And I wish I had it here because it has a really cool cover.
The Corpse in the Compost.
Corpse in the Compost.
Corpse in the Compost. There is a title.
Isn't it?
It's right up there with 8 heads in a duffel bag.
Yes, it is. The Maine Mulch Murder was so cool, and they love it at Mainly Murders down in Kennebunk. I don't even know if they're open this year. I hope so, but you know, that's one of their favorite books, and so they were eager to get their hands on the corpse in the compost. And my mother always said, what was the third one going to be called? And I thought, well, she wanted to do something with that sort of debris at the edges of ponds, you know, like I don't know. I think it was like the something in the debris. I don't know. She never really came up with a title. So fortunately, I don't have to write that one.
It should be the corpse in the pond scum.
Well, but it's got to have that alliteration. Maine mulch, corpse in the compost. It could be the dandy in
the debris.
Death in the debris. Something in the algae. Something beginning with A.
Pond scum, guys, you can't talk about it in other pond scum. So you need the kind of body you'd find in pond scum.
Right.
But pond scum is not the debris on the edge of the pond.
It's all that leaf debris and leaves and
Yeah. What do they call it? There must be a word.
there must be, and I don't know what it is. She used to collect buckets of it. She was an avid gardener, and she used to get all that stuff out of the pond and let it dry. She collected it in old egg baskets and bring it up to her garden and use it for mulch.
I should think it would be nice and full of
Ingredients.
Yeah. Whatever it's full of. Kate, thank you so much.
That was super.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Any last words about where to send your readers?
Everything that I've written is available as an ebook
Oh,
for your Kindle or other device. And so you could just, go to your favorite ebook vendor and look me up as Kate Flora, and then your summer reading is taken care of. There's, strong women and cops, gritty police procedurals and romance and romantic suspense and short stories and true crime.
And good characters and excellent writing and death with heart.
Oh, I like that. Death with Heart. I could put that on a t-shirt too. I'm thinking of going into the t-shirt business.
It's all about the merch.
Get them printed up at Liberty Graphics. They do wonderful t-shirts.
I can't go to Liberty Graphics. I come home with bushels of them.
Cafe Press.
And the Liberty Library is so lovely, and they're so sweet.
Never been there. I thought there was nothing there but Liberty Tools and Liberty Graphics.
No, there's a lovely library. Well, thank you, Sarah, for having me. This was super fun.
Thank you, Kate.
For saying super fun, because that's, not
And I
very,
think we see each other in person soon.
I hope so too.